Okay, I would like to welcome everyone. My name is Nancy Yates, and I am the environmental manager of the Asquamsett Pond Complex, as well as a Conservation Commission member from Lakeville. For many, many years, we have needed a management plan for the Asquamsett Pond Complex. I think that was really evident in 2010 when we had substantial flooding, loss of home, no loss of life, thank goodness. And right now, thanks to the efforts of Senator Rodrick and Representative Oral, we have received some money, $135,000, to start working towards that goal of a management plan for Asquamsett Pond Complex. And this public meeting is a requirement of that grant, those grants. And I would like to, or we would like to share with you what has been accomplished. So I am going to shoot this over to Bill Napolitano from SRPEDD, who will introduce everyone. And like I said, we will share with you what we've accomplished over these last 6 months as a group of shareholders, including Taunton, New Bedford, Lakeville, Middleborough, Rochester, Freetown. So this is a regional project. So after 20 years of waiting for this, I personally am thrilled to death. So there you go, Bill.
All right, thank you, Nancy. I'm going to wait for my slides to come up here. This is the beautiful background slide that Nancy was going to be talking with, but it's the ponds. Everybody can recognize it, and the Nemasket River heading out of the ponds. If we go to the next slide, yeah, this is the agenda we have tonight. Nancy touched on it. We're going to do welcome and introductions. We're going to do a general project overview and talk about the grant, the grant's purpose, and Michelle Craddock from DER is going to walk us through that. Then we're going to talk about the process that we went through and the solution set that we've come up with and some priority actions. One of the things was we were really pleasantly surprised. Like Nancy said, we've been working together on and off probably for about 20 years in various iterations. But the funding that we got from Senator Rodrick and parallel funding that we got from Representative Oral really provided a catalyst here. Some projects just need a catalyst. We know where information is. We know that it's been stored. We know that it's been compiled, but a lot of times it's consigned to the dustbins of history or set aside on shelves or in basements. And a lot of people forget it. And a lot of people who can actually do things, or in positions to do things, never see it. Well, we made sure that this will never see a darkened corner again. It's always going to see the light of day. And we're going to be very progressive going forward. And that's where we're going to end up now, tonight, where we are now and where we're headed. And then we're going to have a brief question and answer and discussion period where we'll record comments. And please feel free to speak then. And what we'd ask you to do is, if you have comments, you can use the chat room during the presentation. And please record them and then come in at the end and give us your questions and comments. That'd probably be the best way. That way we can get in the flow of the presentation. All right, next. And one of the pleasures of my career has been working with a team of people. We kind of have this informal amalgamation of different environmental, public groups, nonprofits. We call ourselves the Resilient Taunton Watershed Network. We've done a lot of work doing watershed education. We've gotten grants together. We work together. I call us the best regional planning agency that doesn't exist. And our motto has always been, we plan with you and not at you. And I'll tell you, especially for the funders, that's really been the motto of this whole exercise. We plan with the Asquamsett Ponds Committee, we plan through the Asquamsett Ponds Committee, and everything that you're going to see tonight has been a result of filtering these things out, putting everything through the sifter, and this is their vision, because these have to be their plans going forward. They have to be comfortable with it. So my team consists of Manamet Incorporated, Eric Wahlberg. We have folks from the Horsley Witten Group, Ellie Baker and Neil Price. Danica Warnes from Mass Audubon's Shaping the Future of Your Communities. She's the Southeast Regional Director. The Nature Conservancy, Sarah Burns. My co-director of environmental programs at SRPEDD, Helen Zinkavich. And myself, I'm Bill Napolitano. And I'd like to turn it over to Michelle Craddock from the Division of Ecological Restoration at this point to talk about the project overview and the purpose and how the grant was facilitated. So Michelle?
Great, thanks, Bill. Well, I'm Michelle Craddock, and I work at the Massachusetts Division of Ecological Restoration, which is part of the Department of Fish and Game. And our agency works on a lot of wide-ranging kind of ecological restoration projects, from cranberry bog restoration to replacing undersized culverts and lots of other kind of projects. So this past year, we received an earmark in our budget from Senator Rodericks to pursue and develop a flood management plan for the Assawamsett Pond Complex region. And to kind of get, I'd heard about the issues going on at Assawamsett and was somewhat familiar with it, but I quickly, I think, a couple days after that happened, I got into one of the dam management meetings and met all the folks and learned just how many really dedicated and invested kind of stakeholders there are with the issues and flooding issues that are facing this region. So what we decided for the funds was that there was a lot of great people doing a lot of great work already. And so we issued a solicitation for a grant for a local organization to really kind of facilitate this process. And so we awarded that to SRPEDD and the team of technical advisors that Bill just introduced. And we couldn't be happier with the progress that they've made over these past, I don't know, I think it's 6 months or something. It's hard to think back. But basically, the part of this project was to work with all of the local stakeholders and try to come up with a really concrete plan for addressing some of the flooding issues in the Assawamsett, and to really try to find some high priority projects that we could tee up for funding from additional grant programs or other, state and federal funding sources, so that they could really get some momentum and get some real on the ground projects done. And I think you'll definitely hear more about that on the coming slides, about the different kinds of projects and some of the successes we've had already. So I will pass it over to, I think it's Danica, or back to Bill.
Send it over to Danica.
Yeah, this is Danica. I'm up next. Thanks, Michelle. So as we were developing this plan and working on prioritizing and advancing those projects that Michelle alluded to, we had a few assumptions in mind that were kind of guiding our process as we were reviewing projects. And the first of which was that climate change is anticipated to exacerbate the flooding issues that are already occurring in and around the APC and the Nemasket River. And we used climate projections that we kept in mind as we were identifying solutions from the Resilient MA, from their high emission scenario predictions for future climate. And those for the Taunton River Basin are an additional 2.56 inches of rain annually by the year 2050, with almost all of this increase concentrated in the winter and spring seasons. Plus, we're also likely to experience an additional 2 days of extreme weather events by the year 2050. And again, this is also expected to be seasonally concentrated. And these changes pose a threat to APC communities, especially given the Nemasket River's current limited ability to transport excess water, which is kind of exacerbating and will continue to exacerbate the flooding issues that we're already seeing. And the second assumption we had in our minds as we were going through this process was that the implementation of the recommendations developed in previous plans has largely not yet materialized on the ground. So there have been many studies of the APC over the years since the 1980s, and they have a great deal of historical knowledge and recommended solutions to a lot of these issues. But not many have been implemented to date. So we really tapped into that existing knowledge set as well as more recent solutions identified in local MVP planning efforts. And what we did for this project was that we synthesized this wealth of previous knowledge as well as the more recent knowledge and tapped into the expertise of the Assawamsett Pond community, who have a lot of that on the ground knowledge of what's currently going on, and use that to develop a program of priority actions for achieving meaningful floodwater mitigation impacts on the ground. And we look through all of these with a lens of looking at nature-based solutions. So next, please. And then the final assumption that we had in mind was that a holistic approach to floodwater management really includes combining both those nature-based solutions that I previously mentioned, which we like to refer to as the more green infrastructure approaches, as well as your traditional gray infrastructure approaches. You really have to have a good mix of both in order to have the greatest impact. And so now I'm going to tell you a little bit about what the difference is between those two different solutions. So gray infrastructure, as I mentioned, are more of like the more conventional engineered solutions that often come to mind when you think of infrastructure, like dams and stormwater pipes, sediment traps. And often the approach with gray infrastructure is to capture stormwater and pipe it away from the source in order to be treated and dealt with far away. And a lot of the infrastructure we have that's currently built that way is aging, and it's not built to withstand the increases in precipitation that we've already been seeing and that we continue to see. So you see a lot of, sometimes you can see failures in this type of infrastructure, as you can see in the image above, that shows a collapsed culvert that was overwhelmed with water, and it collapsed, and the road is now inaccessible. And a lot of these approaches also result in more water quality impairments, because the water, instead of going straight back into the ground, it travels a lot of the time over impervious surfaces, and as it travels over those surfaces, it picks up a lot of pollutants that are on the ground, and it carries it with it to whichever water body it ultimately ends up in. The opposite side, you think, when we think of green infrastructure, we think of more innovative types of development that really work with nature. So it can be preserving the existing nature that is already managing stormwater for us, things like wetlands, or it can be engineered solutions that we create to kind of mimic some of those processes that would take place in a wetland. Like the picture farthest on the right in this slide is a rain garden. So that's kind of like, that's a green infrastructure approach. And the idea with green infrastructure is that we capture and treat stormwater on site as close to the source as possible, and try, whenever we can, we try to return it directly to the ground if that's feasible. And a lot of times these types of structures are more built to equipped to deal with the larger rain events, and can help to save on maintenance costs because they don't have to be repaired as often. And again, as I mentioned, for this project, we really looked at a combination of both of these approaches that would have the greatest impact to reduce flooding across the watershed. So nature-based solutions, I mentioned this earlier, and nature-based solutions really kind of focus on that green infrastructure. So protecting nature and the services that it provides, and also as we develop and construct, incorporating these green infrastructure approaches into the way we do it. So nature-based solutions protect, restore, and or manage an existing ecological system, or mimic those natural processes. Public health and clean water, increase natural hazard resilience, and sequester carbon. And as I mentioned, you do that at three steps. Both before, like as you're developing, you want to protect as much of what's there. As you develop, you want to manage the existing processes through low impact development, which is another term for a way of development that incorporates nature-based solutions and green infrastructure. And in already developed areas, restoring damaged and destroyed ecosystems. You can go to next, please, Ellen. And in a lot of our work with communities, we found that most municipalities and communities in general are open to these types of green infrastructure and nature-based solutions. However, they're unintentionally discouraging them in their local zoning and bylaws and regulations, because a lot of local zoning bylaws require larger lots, and are strict on the dimensional requirements, which results in more impervious surfaces that prevent stormwater from going back into the ground. And a lot of other, I won't go into each of these too much because I want to make sure we have time to get to the projects. But in general, a lot of the local zonings are not allowing or not encouraging the more innovative approaches that we really want to focus on if we want to use nature-based solutions. And if you are interested in learning more about this topic, you can visit the Mass Audubon website, which is massaudubon.org/bylaw review, and we have a lot of resources for municipalities to implement some of these techniques into the way they develop.
Thanks, Danica. Okay, I'm gonna take over here to just talk about the 4 main tasks that we established during this grant process. The first was to convene a steering committee for this work, and we have a naturally awesome committee in the Assabamset Pond Complex Management Team. So the management team, it's been long established, with representatives from each of the pond's communities, from important stakeholder groups like the Herring Fishery Commission, state agencies, and then the water supply entities from Taunton and New Bedford. So it's already this great group that is constantly kind of having these conversations about the different issues in the APC. So it's a great fit. And then kind of expanded that group a little bit for this purpose to include some additional staff from towns, such as MVP core team leaders. And then as SRPEDD, we also kind of intermittently engaged additional state agencies when we knew that they had information that would be helpful. So throughout this process, we've been in touch with Mass DOT and also the USGS. The second task was the kind of background research into all of the previous recommendations and studies, and to synthesize those into kind of one database that we could examine and pull from. So we reviewed many different documents from 1980 all the way up to the present, and kind of pulled out the recommendations in those. At that stage, it didn't really kind of matter what the type of recommendation was, whether it was floodwater management or something that was more related to recreation. We just figured, okay, if we're creating this database, let's have them all in there. So then after pulling those out, we categorized them. And so from 140 total, there was 48 that were specifically related to floodwater management, kind of the purview of this specific effort. And so then with those 48 as a reference point, the steering committee came up with 26 of the highest priority actions, kind of on the basis of the MVP process, where we all met as a group. We had a large format map, and then kind of that's what you see. You'll see in the next picture here. But we're kind of doing an exercise related to that. Yeah, I can just go to that one. So here's the process that we went through in person back in March, beginning of March. And so we were coordinating the geographic location with the priority action areas of the steering committee, with some tabular ways of recording the full comments. So once these are the 26 that kind of became the high priority actions. And then we wanted to get further to what are the really top tier priorities. And so from those 26, we whittled it down to 6 actions that would make the most kind of immediate difference, and that would also set us up for long-term management of the APC and the Nemasket. So that was kind of the project prioritization and synthesis task. Task 3 was to bring in a lot of the work that Danica was talking about. So to see how the existing recommendations, to what extent they included green infrastructure approaches or nature-based solutions. And so we kind of went through, looked at that, and then thought of ways that we could suggest more that are in the nature-based solutions category. And what the picture here is showing is within that effort, we kind of honed in specifically on wetlands, potential wetland restoration sites as areas where we could restore the floodplain and have areas that could capture some flooding during those type of events. So that was task 3. And then task 4, sorry, I'm like a little out of order here, but so right here is the picture is our top 6 prioritization activity voting exercise that was conducted. And with that top 6 determined, we turned our attention to moving those projects toward a platform of implementation. So as I've come to find out more and more as I do this work, you have like a desired goal, say like you want to improve a channel, right? But you have to do all of this legwork in the back end to vet those kinds of solutions with the community, to study the feasibility, design and engineering. There's so many kind of steps to many of these processes that we wanted to figure out, okay, well, where are all of these in that kind of array of steps, and how do we get them to the next tier of that ladder? So things that could be involved in the final task that we did were thinking through estimated costs for some of the projects, preparing some permitting guide information, and really kind of thinking through, okay, what are the steps you have to get through to get to implementation on the ground? And we were able to make progress on all 6 of the priority actions here. And I just wanted to note some like general observations that we saw through the process was that, you know, we quickly understood that while this grant deals with floodwater management, there really is so many other stakeholders and important issues in the APC and the Nemasket. There's water quality issues. There's obviously water supply issues and trying to maintain those supplies. There's the herring habitat and fishery passage. There's a lot of things to think about in this really kind of unique, large scale system here. So we kind of retained our focus on that floodwater, but we kind of always were cognizant of the potential co-benefits that each of the action items we're proposing might have for those other dimensions of the ponds and the river. Okay, and I'm going to turn it over to Ellie and Neil at Horsley Witten to kind of read through these top 6 priorities here, and then get into the first 2 of them.
Thanks, Helen. I'm Neil from Horsley Witten. My colleague Ellie is also here on the line, but I'll start this discussion because most of the following slides about individual projects I'll be talking about. So the 6 priority projects are, the first one was to remove sediment deposition in the first 500 feet of the Nemasket River corridor and install a silt trap to capture future sediment moving down, such that it will be easier to remove in the future than from the actual river itself. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on. We'll talk a little bit more about all of these later on. Second one was to develop a long-term scientifically based hydrologic and hydraulic model for the APC and the Nemasket to support water supply operations, determine firm yield, and support fish passage, among other things. This is shown, these are sort of ordered in terms of priority, in terms of how the steering committee ranked them. But I will say that the second one sort of came out as, even though it wasn't the highest ranked priority, it is perhaps the most important for figuring out how to best implement all of these other ones later on. We'll talk more about that shortly. The third one was to develop an overall management plan for the ponds complex to define the best practices for the dam, sediment fisheries, flow, aquatic invasive species, floodplain issues, water, all of the things that are come into play here. And you can't really look at anything without looking at all of them at the same time, which is taking us back to number 2 with the modeling, so that we can help evaluate all of these things with regards to the various interests that frequently can be a conflict with each other. So you have to understand the pros and cons of how all of these things get impacted in order to make the best decisions about how to move forward. Fourth one was to replace 2 undersized culverts identified, one at the Snake River and one at Route 105. Fifth one was repair or replacement of the Assawampset Pond Dam. We talked briefly about potential removal actions there, and it became clear that the dam does need to stay for water supply and other purposes, but that there was a strong desire to either replace it with a modern one or renovate it in such a way that it can be operated more effectively and easily for all of the various benefits that it provides. The last group of projects are wetland restoration activities, and you see a handful of those that were highlighted, but many more were chosen. We'll talk about those later, but those few that are shown here were some of the highlights. So next, Helen, keep on going. Okay, so I mentioned that, excuse me for the loud motorcycles behind me, that happens here from time to time. So, hold on. My summertime nemesis. The modeling that I was discussing is broken into 2 real kinds. So first off, the problem, right? We understood as we started looking at these projects, we understood right away that we lacked a big, large-scale, watershed-scale model to understand the hydrology of the whole entire system. So this exists in other places in different formats. So one of the most common are groundwater models. So the USGS has built these regional groundwater models for all of the Cape, for the Plymouth Carver Aquifer, for areas of Pembroke, and other places, but there's one lacking for here. So something along that idea of a big groundwater model and or some other kind of linked hydrologic model for the whole watershed is needed to help evaluate how all of this stuff can come into play. This is probably the biggest and most expensive undertaking that we talked about, and as a result, we kind of punted it down the line a little bit here, and we haven't really made much specific progress on that. It's more of a longer term priority. The other thing, though, that we have made some progress on is a more specific local scale hydrologic and hydraulic, we call it H&H model, of the upper Nemasket River that would run from the outlet of the pond down through to Wareham Street, I believe is our target area. And that would specifically focus on the river corridor, the floodplain of the river itself. And it could be used to evaluate different storm events, different elevations in the pond, for how that affects both the depth of flow and the velocity of flow at any point along the river corridor and in the floodplain between the ponds down to its downstream end at Wareham Street. And this model, once it's set up for existing conditions, can then be used to evaluate any number of potential future conditions and projects. So if you want to change the dam up, we can use this model as a way to evaluate what the impacts of that dam removal and then replacement or renovation would be on various downstream resources. If you wanted to do some kind of new fish passage, you could evaluate that. That's this sediment and silt trap we were talking about could be evaluated. Dredging could be evaluated. Various green infrastructure stormwater projects, the culvert replacements we talked about. Pretty much all of these, anything that's happening within the floodplain and the river corridor can be evaluated with this model. So really exciting news that's brand new in the last couple of weeks is the team here, through SRPEDD leading it, was able to apply for and receive a grant from the SNEP, the Southeastern New England Program Network grant, to fund this H&H model of the upper Nemasket. And we're currently getting contracting finalized to get going on that. This model, this upper Nemasket H&H model, will be built using the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. It's called HECRAS, where that stands for Hydrologic Engineering Center, which is the Army Corps' research branch. I believe it's somewhere along the Mississippi. And RAS stands for River Analysis Systems, and that's just the software that's used to do this. This surveying that was discussed at the very beginning of the call that's going on right now is one of the components that will go into informing how this model is built. So Helen, if you would please go to the next. So a little more detail about this first phase of the H&H model for the Upper Nemasket. The components of it are a review of existing data beyond what we've already done so far. So one of the key things here is that there is an existing FEMA model of the river that's at a much larger scale and low resolution, too low resolution to be of much value for the purposes we've been talking about. But we'll figure out what's in there that we can use and adapt the new, more detailed model based off of that. We'll collect a bunch of new field data, including the survey data we talked about, some data on hydrologic inputs, and that will include rainfall, climate change stuff, pond levels that has been monitored for decades to evaluate how we can run this model. Once we have the existing condition set, we'll identify various scenarios and projects that we wish to learn more about, and we'll run those models to understand the impacts, both positive and negative, of any of these different projects, and make recommendations based on that, on what ones are worth doing and what ones might not be, and how those ones that are worth doing can be best completed. And the estimated cost for this, including both the modeling part that we're responsible for and the surveying and other work that's going on right now by OPEC Engineering, is it's actually about $105,000, but we put $125,000 here just to in case things end up, something else gets added later on or whatever. This slide is talking about that larger scale watershed scale study that I began talking with, and really we just put the slide here to have people aware that this is out there and we're thinking about it. But as I said, we haven't really done much with it. It's on a longer term planning horizon. We haven't really figured out, exactly what the scale, what the methodology, what specific modeling type it would be, when it would be conducted, where we might get money to fund this thing, because as you can see, it could be quite expensive. Our really rough estimated cost is the wide range of between 200 and 400 grand to do this, if you really want to add it and try to do it properly. But this could be useful for all these various purposes that Helen was talking about, for trying to evaluate things, not just so that the first phase stuff I was talking about earlier was really just for the Upper Nemasket River corridor. This could be useful for all sorts of projects anywhere within the watershed. And next, please, Helen. The Nemasket sedimentation issue. So this arose, a lot of people in the steering committee and in the general area are concerned about sedimentation in the reach shortly below the dam, for good reason. And proposals have been made throughout the years to do things like dredge, remove the sediment, and build a silt trap. Well, when we started looking at this, we realized that, it's great to see a need and try to look to maybe a likely solution for this. Sometimes that likely solution isn't the best or most permittable solution. So thus come in that modeling that we just finished talking about. And one big goal of that will be to help evaluate if this is the right way to go about it, and if so, how to go about it. There's a lot going on here, right? The movement of sediment through this system is in some regards a natural process. However, by building the dam and by building this enlarged Nemasket River channel, we've changed the natural situation in such a way that we can have created conflicts with how people like to use the system, and perhaps even how herring can migrate through the system depending on the water levels and so forth at different times. So depending on how the modeling comes out here, we can evaluate either doing this project, figuring out if it can be permitted or not, or perhaps there's some other options here. Perhaps there are different channel designs that would better move sediment through the system to keep the system flowing more freely under a wider range of flow conditions. wetland restoration options might be there, alternative channels, depending on how the dam gets redone, that might affect how this all works. So this is sort of a big picture issue that we hope to learn a lot more about through the modeling process and better inform how to meet the goals that people want to see here. Next one, please. So these are the various steps of that. We've already talked about the surveying going on, and then the modeling that will be used to evaluate the various potential options here, gray and green style infrastructure that Danica was discussing earlier. There's a variety of options for both of those that are available. Stakeholder engagement is always important for this. Then, of course, the engineering, design, permitting, and construction and O&M. Can we move to the next, please? I think that's my last. Is Danica, are you taking this one, or Helen, are you up for here?
I think I am.
Yeah.
Okay. Option
Thanks,
3.
Neil.
You're welcome, Bill. Thank you.
All right. Obviously, one of the big things to come out of this, and we spoke about in the beginning, especially Nancy in her introduction, was the fact that for at least the last 18 years, we've wanted a real comprehensive Assawampset Ponds management plan that covers all of the things that we've been talking about this evening. And you can see the statistics right there. I mean, it's a huge area, almost 45,000 acres. We've had excessive flooding experienced in the community, especially everybody remembers 2010. And that's what triggered a lot of the current thinking on the Assawampset Ponds and what we should be doing to help, as far as the study goes and coming up with solutions. And with all of the problems come water quality degradation, invasive plant growth, which again, the Herring Fisheries Commission has been dealing with. Some of the Conservation Commission folks up in Middleborough have been dealing with, and restricted fish passage. I know I've worked with the Division of Marine Fisheries before. And again, your Herring Fisheries Commission, they've been doing yeoman's work in both towns, Middleborough and Lakeville, for a number of years. They're kind of an under the radar group, but fabulous people, and it's been the same folks for a long time. The restricted flow really impedes the herring, the juvenile, returning to the sea, which, I mean, the value of the herring run, the fish run over here, it's been prolific for years. It's actually been so successful that they've seeded populations in other states. And it's a shame that the river itself is becoming an impairment to a natural process and many natural processes, like, some of the stuff that Neil was alluding to, some of the stuff that Danica was talking about before. So that's the real value of a Nemasket River management plan. And if you look on the right-hand side here, this is a draft plan outline. It's pretty much standard procedure. This is the type of plan that the EPA looks at when they look at a watershed management plan. We're probably going to be working within these parameters. But again, the whole nature of the Assawampset Ponds project to date has been to plan with people, not at people. So a lot of these is going to be wiggle room in each one of these areas. We want to talk about local knowledge. We want to go back in and mine the reports that we've pulled out for what information they have. And honestly, when you come into a community to work with them and come into a region to work with the people, they're the local experts. And one of the very fortunate things that we have in this area, in this watershed, is the fact that not only do we have 40 years of reports, some of which were done on Underwood typewriters and are now digitized for the first time on the project page, thanks to people like Helen and Danica and Sarah and all those folks. But we have some of the people who were there when these reports were written. So they know why they were written. They know how they were written. They know what the impact of the recommendations really mean on critical areas in the river, pinch points in the river, environmental issues in the river. So when we proceed with a management plan, we have institutional knowledge and archival knowledge. And in all the years that I've been working in the business, you don't often get that combination. And one of the things that's come out of this, I think, rallying around the management plan is the fact that everybody is pulling in the same direction. It's going to be respective of the water suppliers, it's respective of the fishery, it's respective of the natural resources, it's respective of the residents around the pond. So these are the things we're going to be doing. Obviously, this is what it's all about, a management plan. And this is the thing, balances everything. I think Helen said that before, we're looking for balance. And right now, what have we done? Well, this is another one of those projects that in 6 months, we've made unbelievable progress. We've actually applied to the MVP Action Grant Program with the state, Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program. We worked with 4 of the communities around the ponds to put together MVP plans. And just last week, we put in for an action grant proposal for $100,000, and we've already secured match thanks to one of our partners, the Nature Conservancy, to match the grant. So hopefully, we're keeping our fingers crossed. This is another thing we could hit the ground running in the summer and start working on the management plan. And again, it's going to be inclusive. It always has to be inclusive or it's not a plan. We're going to research, collect data, analysis, go back, revisit some of the stuff, look at land use and regulatory parameters and do the reviews, draft a watershed management plan, and then do periodic updates, because that's the other thing. We've seen plans going back and doing the review process here that were prepared and sat on shelves, some of them for 20, 30, 40 years. And if they're not updated, you know, number one, people don't know about it. You have to keep plans in the public eye to keep them alive. And that's been the whole thing with my process here. These plans now have seen the light of day. They're on a project page and they're going to be alive. And the committee is going to breathe life into the plan. And hopefully the generations to come to follow this process are going to carry out the recommendations of the plan. Estimated cost about $125,000. Hopefully we'll have the money secured. Hopefully that's some good news for you coming down the pike. Here's another, the Snake River culvert. Now, Neil talked about the culverts. I've spoken about the culverts with the water suppliers. I know Cahal's listening tonight and he was thrilled about this too. And especially the people on Long Pond. A lot of times we talk about the Assawampset ponds, we talk about the Nemasket River and some of the ponds that are involved in the water supply. Long Pond is more of a residential area. I worked with them going back probably 20 years, looking at aquatic invasives. What's the problem? You have a real, if you look at the dot there on the map, on the slide, you have a very undersized culvert trying to affect water exchange between the Assawampset ponds and the Long Pond. And what does it affect? It's not only flooding, wetlands, water quality, the integrity. If you talk again to your fisheries guys, the fish go in there. There's critical habitat over there, a number of issues. It also affects aquatic invasives in the ponds, proper pond flushing and water exchange, like I just said. So the problem there is the culvert was put in years ago. It's not that it's in excessively bad shape. In fact, they've been, Mass DOT owns Bedford Street and owns the culvert. And they've had underwater dive teams come every 5 years. The last time was in 2016. I got the report. It looks good. I've been working with Mass DOT more recently. But the culvert's a little bit askew. It's a 4x8 box culvert. It was never big enough to begin with. And now with everything that's happened in the last, 20 years or so, you're adding more input to what it has to handle. To try to rectify the problem, they put a 2x2 box culvert a little farther up, about 30 feet to the north, and it really doesn't do anything. If you look at it just to facilitate the exchange of the river and the pond, you need a bigger culvert. So that's what we're looking for right now. We're going to be looking at the Mass DOT owned culvert, and I'm working with District 5. We're going to look at the design. We're going to look at the overflows and what floods on Bedford Street. And it got taken out pretty much during the 2010 rains, everybody remembers. But periodically when we have high rains, it'll overtop. So what we're doing right now is we're going to file a notice of intent with Lakeville Conservation Commission. I am working on getting a state highway access permit from Mass DOT. And I'm working with Andrea Coates from Mass DOT District 5. She's the environmental person. Hopefully when we do this, we can do a field assessment and work to determine design specifications, work to get some money and engineer a culvert design, go through the permitting, and then hopefully remove the culvert and drop one in. The estimated project cost would be about $275,000 to $600,000. That's engineering, design, permitting, construction. And hopefully we can work with our state partners. Working with the Division of Ecological Restoration, having them being a partner in all this process is another advantage that we have, because this is the business that they're in. I've worked with them in other places to do culvert design, removal, repair, but also dam removals. So Again, DER is a very, very valuable partner in all this, even just for advice, sage advice. Next one's the Assawamsett Pond Dam repair. And I've had conversations as recently as a half an hour before we went on the air about the dam repair. It's old. At one time, it was classified as a high hazard dam. It's now classified as a low hazard dam, but there's still things about the dam that don't quite work right. It's a little bit inefficient. The spillway isn't probably functioning properly. The fish ladder isn't what it could be. And I'll tell you, to the folks out there who have never seen people go out there and change the boards on the dam, it's like watching the Flying Walenders. Those guys are brave beyond the call of duty. And it gets harder every year. These are water-soaked boards. They're heavy. They do a tremendous job. They're trying to maintain adequate flow for water supply. They're also trying to maintain adequate flow for the fishery. And, you know, as Neil said, there's problems coming out of the ponds. The natural wave action on the shore of the ponds causes erosion, causes sediment buildup in the Nemasket River coming out of the ponds. So there's a lot of things that really have to be looked at. It was constructed primarily for water supply purposes, not for flood management. And one of the things that you look at when you look at all the components of the project and everything that we've looked at and the projects that we've come up with here is that everything kind of works together. You're going to see all of these projects are interrelated. If we can fix the culvert, it will help the dam. If we can fix the dam, it will help the Nemasket River and the fishery. If we can help the upper Nemasket River, it will help the Nemasket solve its flood issues going into downtown Middleborough and the lower Nemasket. So it's kind of like a symphony. When you get the right projects in the right places, go in the right direction, it'll all work together. And that culminates in the management plan. So the solution here is repair or replace the dam. And it'll probably be more of a dam repair type of issue. So what we'll be looking at is pending results from a feasibility study, which again, we can use the hydrologic and hydraulic study. We can use the sediment studies. We can use the culvert studies, all to feed into the feasibility study for the dam. And it'll help us balance those competing interests. What we have to do for Long Pond, what we have to do for the Assawamsett Ponds complex, and what we have to do for the upper Nemasket River watershed. Next slide. So again, these are the things we have to do. We want to conduct the feasibility study. I've spoken to people already about funding. We're trying to get out ahead of these projects. And I think if we can come up with a feasibility study and a permitting pathway, it will help us eventually apply for dam repair and replacement money. I've got a couple of sources that I'm talking to right now. We want to evaluate the dam, obviously, the ecological needs, the physical needs, conduct an assessment and field work, look at the specs, and do some preliminary conceptual engineering and design, get it up to 75% design and permitting. Final design, once you do that, you put out a bid package and come up with an engineering consulting or an engineering build firm, and then you get into the dam construction. Now, the important thing to remember here is you have the water suppliers there, New Bedford, but Taunton is the owner of the dam. So working with the city of Taunton and the water superintendent and the water department will be critical. And I think one of the great things here is the strength of the project and the multidisciplinary approach of the project and all the things that would go into the feasibility study, all the projects that we've discussed previously, will really help the city of Taunton come up with some solutions for this dam and how they want to approach the dam repair, replacement, or whatever we choose. And after that, obviously, you're going to have to come with a monitoring and O&M plan, operation and maintenance. And the costs, we've kicked it around. We've been high, we've been low, but it seems as though it's going to be about $1 million to $3 million. And I'm going to kick it over to Eric and Sarah for the wetlands restoration.
All right, thanks, Bill. I'll kick us off. And Eric, you just jump in if you want to add anything. So the last priority project that was selected by the steering committee is wetlands restoration. On the slide that Neil talked through when we were first talking about the priority outcomes, there were 4 locations that were highlighted as a potential place to start. So wetland restoration at Bridge Street, Wood Street, Wareham Street, and Vaughan Street. You can see 2 of those here on this picture. And those locations were first identified in a study a few decades ago, looking primarily at canoe and paddling access for the Nemasket, which is a great, recreation is a great and important outcome. But, circling back to kind of the problems and the solutions we're looking for in this project, we really wanted to look for wetland restorations opportunities that would improve flood storage, water quality, recreational access, and habitat. So to do that, we ended up taking a slightly broader approach. And we're not going to look at the slide again, but it was up on the screen earlier where we had those little squares scattered all around the ponds. And what we did for that was we looked at some previous work done just in the past 3 to 5 years by the Nature Conservancy and Horsley Witten and others to look for areas that probably were wetlands at one point that have either been drained or managed or developed, and screen across those opportunities for areas that could maybe more easily be restored as wetlands. And, they're called wetlands. They like to be wet, so they can really provide a lot of flood storage services. They can kind of act like sponges. So we did a little bit of, well, Eric did it. Eric did some GIS work to look at all these opportunities according to some modeling that's been done. And then we worked with the steering committee to kind of explore the opportunities that this model picked up and to say, which areas might actually be feasible to either restore or manage as wetlands. And Helen, you can go to the next slide. So this is the next step slide. So we've started down the path of this wetlands restoration analysis. I am not going to go super nerdy on the details for this one, but like I said, we're looking for areas that are very likely to be able to be wetlands again. And within that subset, kind of looking for ones that could really help with flood storage and water quality. And then we did the first screen of looking at the potential sites with the steering committee. And we did that obviously, well, maybe not obviously, we did that as a Zoom meeting. So we just clicked around the images of the maps. So those are the 2 next steps that are kind of underway. And then from there, the next steps that have yet to be done are to pick some of the most promising sites from our desktop or our computer screening and actually go out and take a look at them and just see what they're like and see what the soils are like. Soils can sort of tell you if they used to be a wetland and if they maybe could be a wetland again. And we can look for plant communities that indicate that as well. This framework that we use to look for opportunities has been used in the Mill River watershed, so also within the Taunton River watershed, and many of the sites we visited were turning themselves back into wetlands, which is great. So once the on-site assessment is done, we can sort of validate whether we were correct in our assumptions, and then we can look for funding to do engineering, design, and permitting of the wetland restoration process. And then you can move to construction and monitoring. We have an estimated project cost here listed at about $500,000. I think there's a potential range in this price, and in some cases some of our flood abatement and water quality goals might be achieved by changing how some areas are managed or conserving areas that have returned themselves to being wetlands. So that one is certainly a ballpark. And we also flagged that wetland restoration opportunities might be able to help in the context of the sedimentation at the upper Nemasket and the dam site And that's an area that has been called out as being a potentially restorable wetland also. So maybe a wetland restoration could be part of that, sort of the green version of the solutions, the potential solutions for that area. Eric, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Can you hear me okay? Is the audio good?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, this is Eric Wahlberg with Manomet. Apologies for not being on Zoom with you. Traveling back to Massachusetts, so on the road right now. But just a couple of thoughts about where we are and wrapping up the desktop portion of the analysis. So we took the input that we got from the steering committee, which identified the sub areas that are shown with the black boxes that Sarah alluded to. And now that information is being layered up with topography for the region, with the goal being finding areas that are primed for wetlands restoration that are also low on the landscape, which would indicate areas that are likely of high value for flood control. And then to a point that was made early on in the presentation, I mean, we're certainly cognizant of the need to try to address multiple different concerns. And so also layering up the wetlands opportunities with areas of high habitat value. And so we'll create a hierarchy through that desktop analysis. And then as Sarah said, the follow-on, this won't be actually part of this particular project, but our follow-on effort will certainly involve getting out in the field and really starting to differentiate areas where we've got good possibilities from those where we've got less. So I think that's it, unless anybody's got questions on it.
Thanks, Eric.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, I think we're doing questions at the end.
Okay, super.
Yep. And then I think this is my slide, but if that's wrong, somebody else can just start talking. But so, we've been reviewing these 6 priority projects through the lens of what's already going on and what the next steps are. So to summarize that, the first one was the sedimentation issue in the Upper Nemasket, and the Bill and the Herring Commission have worked to get funds in place to have outback engineering out in the river. They're doing it, I mean, not right this very minute, but it's an active project going on now. They're surveying and looking at what the bottom of the river, what kind of things are in the bottom of the river and sediment sampling. And there's also been a grant received to engage the public about the Nemasket River and the potential next steps. So once the survey work and sediment sampling is done and we get a sense of what's going on there, we can review both the gray solutions of silt trap and dredging, and also explore some of the green solutions that Neil and I and others have talked about. So that's that one. For the H&H study, as Neil mentioned, we do have a grant that has been announced, and we're working on getting that contract up and running to start looking at how the water is moving through the Upper Nemasket from the outlet of the pond. And so from that work, the next steps are to start testing possible scenarios based on what we learn about how the water moves during different rain events and things like that. The pond complex and Nemasket watershed management plan has been submitted to the state for municipal vulnerability preparedness action grant funding. And so when we get that money, everybody cross your fingers, we get to start thinking about how to engage the community to take all of this work and make sure that, as Bill has pointed out, it gets to be a living document and we can continue making progress against all these priorities. For the Snake River culvert replacement, research is underway, and so is collaboration with Mass DOT, who owns the culvert. And the next steps in that process are to get to a point where we can get some boots on the ground and look at the culvert and do some field evaluation and start to think about funding for replacement. For the Assawamsett Dam, thinking about repair or replacement, the process has already begun to look at potential funding sources. And Horsley Witten has taken the lead on sort of spelling out what the process for permitting that project would look like. And when we have the results of the field work that Outback is doing and the H&H study that we are working on getting the funds moving on that one, that will be really key information to help us make the case that we need funding to do a feasibility study to figure out if the dam needs to be repaired or replaced or what needs to happen there. And then with the wetland restoration, we have undertaken the first few steps of looking at you know, GIS and maps and talking with the steering committee about potential sites. So there's and the next steps are to think a little bit more with the computer interface and then get out in the field and try to find some really high value, like, you know, bang for the buck opportunities, and then think about how those could be funded as well. And now back to Helen.
Okay, thanks everyone for all the great summaries of the project work that came out of this and where we are now. So to go to the next slide here, we're gonna, you know, we can take questions at the end. We're almost at the end of the presentation, so we'll be able to take some questions here live. I also, we put together just a short, really short 2-question survey that's accessible online, and I'm going to post that link into the chat once I'm able to get to it. But basically the first question asks, actually, let's see if we can just go to it. All right, hopefully everyone can see that on their screen. But the first question asks for participants to basically do the same exercise that the steering committee did when they had 26 potential highly, you know, high priority actions to consider for the APC and the Nemasket, and then to pick the top 6. So we're curious if the top 6 that was identified by the steering committee is also a representative of what the larger community around the ponds area thinks as well. So in here you just would select, you know, put a check mark next to 6 of them to indicate your top 6. And then there's a comment field here for any longer form feedback that anyone might want to leave. Unfortunately, it's so hard to do these things over Zoom these days and all online, but we're definitely doing the best we can here. So hopefully that opportunity for comment is also helpful. All right, so let's see. And we'll also I'll send that link out. It can be posted with the recording of this meeting, and then we'll send it by email to everyone who registered for this event, since, you know, we have those emails on file, and then we can get it to you directly. And we just want to encourage everyone to keep coming to meetings, because there's going to be definitely more of them happening in the near future, definitely for 2 of the processes that are coming up. One is related to the H&H study. There's another grant that we've been able to access funds for, specifically for community engagement as part of consideration of the upper Nemasket kind of corridor. And so there's going to be a series of public meetings about that, and integrating different alternatives presented at those meetings into the H&H model to see how community supported actions appear in that model and see their effect, and then kind of try and make a community-led decision-making effort around some different options through that community outreach platform. And then the second, you know, potential hopeful process is the APC and Nemasket Watershed Management and Climate Action Plan. That's the one that we've submitted to the MVP program for grant funding for. And as part of that grant, we wrote that we definitely anticipate there being 6 public meetings that they would rotate around the different communities. And then that those meetings would cover the topics of water supply, water quality, recreational access, habitat enhancement, floodwater management, and then creating a culture of watershed protection. So we're really crossing our fingers that plan can be pursued at this time, and that those meetings will be a reality as well. So thanks everyone so much for listening. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so I can put that link in the chat. And if anyone has any questions, this would be a great time. Okay, I see someone has their hand raised. So Chris Spratt, if you want to go ahead.
Hi everybody, Chris Spratt. Hopefully it's not too loud. I'm in Boston right now, but I'm a Lakeville resident and a member of the Board of Health. But also for my full-time job, I work as a civil engineering technician for the Natural Resource Conservation Service. And I figured I'd just mention it. And probably my agency isn't a stranger to some of the people that have already spoken today. We're partnered with DER on a new regional conservation partnership program for wetland restoration for cranberry bogs. And we've also had an ongoing watershed management project on the Cape for fish passage and stream restoration. And I figured I'd just mention it as maybe a potential funding source down the road as another partner to be added to the mix. I just wanted to just put it out there so people will know there's other people out there on the federal side that could help out hopefully too. And that's all I had to say.
Thanks, Chris. Okay. Any other questions right now? Comments?
I have one, if you don't mind. Brian Day, Lakeville resident and member of the Board of Selectmen. First of all, great presentation. It's a lot of great information that you shared with us. So thank you very much for putting that together. It's great to see this coming to a head. Of the identified priority projects you've presented today, is there an absolute order they must be executed for successive projects to be successful? Could any or all of the priority projects be executed individually to achieve some form of success without unintended negative impacts if the others couldn't be completed soon enough? I'm just kind of curious, as you folks look at this, at least from the priority projects, what do you see as the ordering for, you know, the most benefit if funding becomes limited?
Let's give that one to Bill and Neil. Do you guys mind taking that one?
Sure, Neil, you want to take a shot at that first, and I can.
Absolutely, Bill. I was patiently waiting for you to take your first stab, but I'm happy to as well.
Okay.
So I think some of the projects can happen independently, whereas others, there is definitely an order. So for example, the hydrologic and hydraulic study of the upper Nemasket River that we're about to start is sort of a key first step before either dredging of the channel or the construction of a silt trap or dam renovation or replacement options or new fish passage options or wetland restoration options in that immediate area can be done, as well as any of the potential culvert replacements for the downstream road crossings. So all of those hinge on first completing the H&H study. The other stuff, so for example, the watershed management plan can move ahead independently as we are currently trying to do. The Snake River Culvert project is outside of the reach of that upper Nemasket project, so it will need its own hydrology study, but it can be done independently without need for other things.
Yeah.
I think, Bill, you want to chime in if I'm missing any projects that might be able to?
No, it's a great question, Brian. I'm pretty much in the same camp as Neil. One of the things that I had referred to when I was talking about the studies is how you have that symphony type of effect. And I think starting off with Neil's H&H study on the Nemasket is going to be critical. And the Outback engineering work, we can't minimize that either. The stuff that's being done by Outback for the Middleborough Lakeville Herring Fisheries Commission is also going to be critical, because these projects will inform what we're going to be doing as far as feasibility studies go for the dam moving forward. And they'll be intrinsic also to the management plan. The management plan can proceed. Like Neil said, that's something that we can get off the ground. But the projects that feed into one another are the ones I just described, as well as the Culvert study. The Culvert study is going to be key also to the feasibility study for the dam because it involves the exchange of water again, the effect of fish passage, how the dam functions, how the spillway is going to function, how we redesign that maybe. So there are certain projects that are going to be tied into one another, but a couple of the others can work independently. The culvert I'm pursuing independently because it's going to be a state highway access permit. It's a separate permitting issue. Neil's project is going to be separate. I think one of the other key things that Helen mentioned too was the fact that we did get a grant from the Taunton River Stewardship Council. They're the stewards of the wild and scenic Taunton River, federal money. And that's going to be for those workshops and public workshops to tie together the work of the Fisheries Commission and the hydrologic study in Middleborough to talk about what's going to go on in the Nemasket River, the potential of dams and potential flood impact studies. So a lot of these things can work together, but some of them can work quite well independently and all be tied in through the management plan.
Okay, thank you very much for expanding on that. That's great.
I'm checking the chat box of the meeting. I don't see any written questions there. Yeah, so I put that link to the feedback form there. I would definitely encourage everyone, if you can take a couple minutes to fill that out. It would be really helpful to kind of ground truth some of the work we did here, and I think it's very informative for us. Anything else? Any last? Does Bill or Nancy, anyone kind of want to wrap it up here?
Well, I've already said 100 times to everybody over the last 6 months how excited I am after 20 years to really find something substantial is really happening. I've been very, especially with the Fish and Herring Commission, have come to the meetings over the years saying, oh, well, we have $5,000 grant. And I'm like, that's not even gonna make us splash in the pond. And it's good that you could maybe clear some weeds to make room for the fish to go through, but the problem's much bigger than that, and we need a lot of people involved, which we have now, a lot of knowledgeable people and organizations and some money, and here we go. And I hope we all do everything in our power to keep it moving forward. I know the people in Lakeville will be really happy to see this happening because we seem to sustain the most damage in the flooding on Long Pond. And like I say, it's not just the dam or the culvert, it's just a combination of everything combined. And it seems like we're looking at everything we need to look at. We have a little bit of money and we all need to keep pushing and going forward, and yahoo. That's it for me.
Could I, Leah Fabian, also Lakeville Selectman, where with the lakes, with the water, mostly being in Lakeville, I feel like we're the hosts here, but, we certainly can't help our people, protect themselves against flooding without this group. But I feel like, all the science folks are doing their thing. So please know that, we're here if there's anything that we can do. I know that there is going to be, as part of the discussion, some permit going through the Conservation Commission, which I believe sits on the Conservation Board. But if there's anything else that, we can do from a local level, please don't hesitate to give us a call. Call the office, call me directly. Nancy has my number. Let Nancy know. But this is really, really, really nice to see. It's just really great to see how many people are working You know, I will just say myself that one of the things that sort of, you know, for me is the culverts, the Department of Transportation stuff. To me, it's just, I would love to be able to see, you know, some of that fixed. I don't know, again, how we get there, but having it identified though is a good place. So I will excitedly do the survey.
I think I'd like to thank all of the folks that have worked with us and stayed with us. Like I said, I've been here at SRPEDD for 34 years. I started working on the ponds back in 1989. So to see some of these projects see the light of day, see some of these recommendations take on a life, to see the commitment, that this is what it's all about, and to look at all these things going forward. I'd like to thank the Senator for providing the catalyst in the funding. And DEI has done a wonderful job facilitating this whole process for us and allowing us to work through it and work with you. Like I said, we plan with you. And if the people weren't interested and if the people weren't committed, and there have been so many wonderful people who have been committed for a number of years just waiting for the opportunity, that's what it's all about. And you're the life of the plan. Whatever plans come out of this, like I said, you guys are the life of the plan. And you're the ones who are going to take the plans that we can help you put together and breathe life into them and see them finished. And if it's not this bunch of people, it's going to be the next bunch of people. We'll leave a legacy for them. But, you know, working with all of this, and when Chris was on before talking about the USDA, I mean, the USDA is at the foundation of all this. Most of those plans that we unearthed and archived and digitized for the first time came out of the USDA and the Resource Conservation and Development area. And they started in the late 70s and maybe saw the light of day in 1980. So there's a history, there's a continuity, and this is just the latest part of it. And it's been a privilege to work with all of you, and it will be a privilege to continue to work with all of you and more of you as you become involved. So on behalf of the technical team, thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you. Thank you to the Senator as well for, you know, I remember early talks with him and you know, Senator Roderick saying, you know, I think we can get the grant money. And I was like, oh, wow, this is like a dream come true. So, and I know people like Nancy that have spent years and years and years and years just working and protecting, not just, you know, saying, oh, I want to do something, literally walking miles and miles and miles, protecting everything that she possibly can, you know, because these lakes will hopefully be here long after most of us are gone, and it would really be nice to just see them moving the way nature intended. So again, thank you to everybody.
Okay, well with that, I think we'll end the call here. Be on the lookout for that email from us with that link. And yeah, it was a pleasure. Thanks everyone so much.
So much.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your work.